Sunrise painted the Arizona desert gold, as it had for 40 years since Joseph Blackfeather buried his heart alongside his wife. The weathered Apache moved through his days like a ghost, tending his small garden, hunting when necessary, speaking to no one. His cabin stood isolated against the vast landscape, a monument to his solitude. The locals left him alone, whispering stories of the silent Indian who'd once loved so deeply he couldn't bear to love again. Then came the night when 3 soft knocks broke his silence. Opening his door, he found a girl no older than 10, feet bloodied from travel, cradling a whimpering infant. Could an old man whose heart had turned to stone learn to care again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joseph stared at the girl and infant on his doorstep, his weathered face revealing nothing. The child, no more than 9 or 10, stood her ground despite her exhaustion. Her dark eyes, wary yet determined, reminded him of someone he'd spent 40 years trying to forget. Go to town. 7 miles that way? He pointed east, his voice rough from disuse. Please, the girl whispered, glancing behind her as if pursued by shadows. Just tonight. The baby in her arms whimpered, a tiny fist escaping the threadbare blanket. Joseph felt something stir in his chest, an unwelcome sensation he quickly suppressed. No room, he muttered, beginning to close the door. The girl's foot, small and dusty, slid forward, preventing the door from shutting completely. We walked all day. She needs water. Joseph's eyes traveled to the infant, then to the horizon where the sun had disappeared, leaving only purple bruises against the darkening sky. Night in the desert was no place for children. He stepped aside without a word. The girl hesitated, then slipped past him, her thin body tense as a hunted rabbit's. His one-room cabin lay before them, sparse, functional, a place for surviving rather than living. A wood stove, a table with a single chair, a narrow bed in the corner. Nothing had changed in decades. Nothing was meant to. Sit, he ordered, pointing to the edge of his bed. He filled a tin cup with water from a bucket and handed it to the girl, who drank half before carefully tipping the rest to the baby's parched lips. You got names? He asked, moving to the stove where a pot of bean stew had been simmering. I'm Maya, she answered softly. This is Lily, Joseph grunted, ladling stew into his only bowl. He placed it before the girl, then stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching as she ate with the careful restraint of someone accustomed to hunger. Your parents? He asked. Maya's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Gone. Joseph recognized the hollow tone, not the gone of temporary absence, but the gone of finality. He'd used that same tone when neighbors had asked about Rosa in those early days. As night deepened, Joseph pulled his old sheepskin from beneath the bed. He spread it on the floor beside the wood stove, then retreated to his porch chair, making it clear with unspoken certainty that he would sleep outside. Through the window, he watched Maya arrange the sleeping infant on the bed, building a protective barrier of pillows around her. The girl then curled at the foot of the bed like a loyal dog, her body between the baby and the door. On the porch, Joseph sat rigid in his chair, listening to the desert night. Coyotes called in the distance, while stars burned coldly overhead. The same stars that had witnessed his grief 40 years ago. He fingered the leather string around his neck, from which hung a small silver locket he hadn't opened since the day he buried Rosa. Sleep evaded him. The unexpected presence in his cabin had disturbed more than his routine. It had disturbed a silence cultivated over decades. The silence that had become both his protection and his prison. Before dawn, the baby's crying pierced the night. Joseph tensed, waiting for it to stop. When it didn't, he reluctantly rose and entered the cabin. Maya was pacing, bouncing the wailing infant, while whispering soothing words that clearly weren't working. Her face showed panic when Joseph appeared in the doorway. She's hungry, Maya explained, her voice tight with worry. I tried water, but without a word, Joseph moved to a trunk in the corner. From it, he withdrew a carved wooden box, the object untouched for decades. Inside lay a silver spoon with a turquoise inlay on the handle. "My wife's," he said gruffly, handing it to Maya. "For the water. Might help." The girl accepted the spoon with reverence, understanding instinctively its significance. The silver gleamed in the dim light, a sudden brightness in the dusty cabin. "Thank you," she whispered. Joseph turned away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "At first light, I'll take you to town." But as the sun began to stain the horizon gold, Joseph found himself mixing cornflour with water, heating it to a thin gruel. He told himself it was merely to silence the infant's cries. It had nothing to do with the way the morning light caught the silver spoon as it passed between the girl's fingers and the baby's mouth. Nothing to do with the ghost of a woman who had once dreamed of feeding children with that same spoon. Nothing at all. Joseph stood at the window, watching dawn paint the desert in shades of amber and gold. Behind him, the girl and baby slept, their breathing the only sound in the cabin that had known nothing but silence for decades. His promise to take them to town echoed in his mind. The right thing to do, the sensible thing. Yet his feet remained rooted to the floorboards as the sun climbed higher. When Maya finally stirred, he busied himself at the stove, not meeting her questioning gaze. "We leave after you eat," he said. Placing cornmeal mush before her, Maya nodded, her shoulders slumping slightly. The baby awakened with soft, cooing sounds, and Maya lifted her with practiced hands. "She needs changing," Maya said quietly. Joseph frowned. I can use my shirt. I have another in my bag." The simplicity of her solution and the resignation in her voice stirred something uncomfortable in Joseph's chest. This child had been caring for an infant alone. For how long? "Where were you headed?" he asked, his voice gruff. Maya's eyes flitted to the window, then back to Lily. "North. My grandmother lives in Flagstaff. At least she did. I haven't seen her since I was little," Joseph grunted. "That's 100 miles. I know." She lifted her chin, defiance flashing through her exhaustion. "On foot?" "We took buses when we could." Joseph studied her more carefully. Her clothes were worn but once decent. The infant's blanket, though dirty, was store-bought. These weren't children who had always lived rough. "Your parents," he began, then stopped at the sudden hardening of her expression. "Mom died when Lily was born. Her husband," Maya's voice caught. "He's not Lily's father. Or mine." The silence that followed contained volumes. Joseph had spent decades as a solitary man, but he recognized the wounds of cruelty when he saw them. He rose abruptly and moved to a cabinet in the corner. From behind canned goods and dusty supplies, he withdrew a wooden carving knife with an intricately decorated handle. His fingers traced the elk bone handle where symbols of protection had been carefully etched. He'd carved it as a young man, a gift for Rosa when they first married. She'd used it for everything, cutting herbs, preparing food, even trimming his hair on summer evenings as they sat on the porch. Turning back to Maya, he placed the knife on the table. "You keep this close," he said. "Town might ask questions I can't answer." Maya stared at the knife, then at Joseph, understanding dawning in her dark eyes. "You're not taking us to town. Not today." The words surprised him as much as her. "Baby needs rest. You too." Relief and suspicion warred on Maya's face. "Why?" Joseph had no answer that made sense, even to himself. 40 years of solitude cracked by a child's plea. What sense was there in that? "Got chores," he said instead, heading for the door. "Stay inside." Outside, Joseph spent the morning splitting wood with methodical precision, each strike of the axe punctuating his thoughts. The tribal police would be looking for these children. Someone would be searching. By harboring them, he was inviting trouble he'd spent decades avoiding. Yet when he returned at midday, something in his chest loosened at the sight of Maya asleep on his bed. The knife within reach, the baby nestled beside her. In sleep, the wariness left the girl's face, revealing how young she truly was. On his table lay an unexpected sight, a crude doll fashioned from scraps of cloth and twine that must have come from Maya's small pack. Its button eyes stared up at him, a silent witness to his intrusion. Joseph touched it hesitantly. The stitching was clumsy but determined, the work of small fingers, learning to create something from nothing. It reminded him painfully of Rose's first attempts at sewing. Before her hands became skilled with needle and thread, he left the doll undisturbed and quietly placed a jar of water beside the bed. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the desert floor, Joseph found himself telling Maya about the plants that grew around his cabin, which could be eaten, which could heal, which to avoid. She listened with intense concentration, memorizing each detail as if her life depended on it. Perhaps it did. As night fell, he again prepared to sleep on the porch, but paused at the door. "One more day," he said, not looking at her. "Then we figure something else out." "Thank you," Maya whispered, the carved knife resting beside her like a talisman. Joseph nodded once and stepped into the darkness, wondering what Rosa would make of his unexpected guests and of the strange lightness he felt despite the complications they brought to his carefully ordered solitude. One day stretched into 3. Joseph told himself each morning would be the last, yet found himself inventing reasons for delay. The baby needed more strength for travel. A dust storm threatened on the horizon. The girl had developed a slight cough. By the 4th day, he could no longer ignore their dwindling supplies. The single can of condensed milk he'd been carefully rationing for the infant was nearly empty. "I need to go to town," he announced, as Maya sat on the porch step, watching the sunrise while Lily slept inside. Alarm flashed across her face. "You're coming back?" The question carried the weight of abandonment, a familiar weight Joseph recognized. He nodded once, locked the door, opened for no one. Joseph hadn't driven his old pickup in months. The engine protested before reluctantly turning over. Dust billowed behind him as he navigated the rutted path toward the reservation town of White River. The White Mountain Apache Reservation had changed over the decades of his isolation. New buildings stood alongside the old. More cars, fewer horses. The trading post had become a small grocery store with gas pumps out front. Joseph parked at the edge of town, his stomach knotting as he felt curious eyes track his movement. Few here would recognize him now, the once respected medicine man's son who had withdrawn completely after his young wife's death. Those old enough to remember would have their own stories about Joseph Blackfeather, none of them accurate. Inside the store, he filled his basket methodically. Milk powder, canned beans, flour, dried fruit. He hesitated at the baby section, then added diapers and formula to his pile. At the counter, the middle-aged clerk, a woman with silver-streaked hair and familiar eyes, studied his purchases. "Joseph Blackfeather," she said, not a question, but a statement of recognition. "Been a long time." He nodded stiffly, placing cash on the counter. "You're Sarah Little Creek's girl," he said after a moment. "Nora," she smiled, surprise warming her features. "Good memory. Mother passed 10 years back." "Sorry to hear." Nora continued scanning his items. "Don't recall you having little ones around." Joseph kept his expression neutral. "Just stocking up." Her eyes lingered on the formula and diapers. "There's been talk. Tribal police came through yesterday. 2 children missing from up north. Girl about 9, baby just months old." Joseph's hand instinctively moved to his shirt pocket, where he kept his tobacco pouch. The familiar gesture bought him time to steady his voice. "That's so." Nora leaned forward slightly. "They say the girl took the baby from her stepfather." "Man claims they ran away." She lowered her voice. "Officer Martin mentioned the man had a record. Domestic calls." Joseph absorbed this, his face betraying nothing. "Communities worried for those kids," Nora continued, bagging his groceries. "Being out there alone and all." As she handed him his change, her fingers brushed his deliberately. "My nephew works tribal services now. He helps families get right with the law. If you hear anything about those children..." Their eyes met in silent understanding. "I keep to myself," Joseph said finally. "Yes," she agreed. "You always have." As Joseph turned to leave, Nora called after him. "Almost forgot." "Wait here." She disappeared into a back room, returning with a small paper bag. From it she withdrew a tarnished brass bell, no larger than a walnut, with intricate designs etched into its surface. "Found this in Mother's things years back. She always said it belonged to your family." Some kind of ceremonial thing. Joseph stared at the bell, recognition tightening his throat. It had hung in his mother's kitchen, its gentle tone summoning him to meals throughout his childhood. He'd believed it lost decades ago. "Mother would want you to have it back," Nora said, pressing it into his palm. Joseph closed his fingers around the bell, feeling its familiar weight. "Thank you," he managed. Driving back, the bell sat on the seat beside him, its presence as disquieting as the news about the tribal police. The children couldn't stay with him, that much was clear. Yet the thought of the stepfather claiming them made his jaw clench. At the cabin, Maya flung open the door before he'd fully stopped the truck, relief evident in her posture. Joseph noted how she quickly scanned the horizon behind him, checking for followers. That night, after the children were asleep, Joseph sat on the porch, rolling the small brass bell between his weathered fingers. Its surface caught the moonlight, revealing symbols of protection and blessing his mother had explained to him long ago. He'd have to make a decision soon. Return the children to authorities who might send them back to danger, or become something he'd avoided for 40 years, involved. The bell made no sound as he turned it over and over, but he could hear its echo from the past nonetheless, calling him back to a world he'd long abandoned. Midnight brought a full moon and Lily's desperate wailing. Joseph woke instantly, decades of living alone having made him alert to any disturbance. He found Maya pacing the small cabin, bouncing the inconsolable infant while whispering soothing words that had no effect. "She won't stop," Maya said, exhaustion and worry etching her young face. "I've tried everything." Joseph stood awkwardly in the doorway. Crying children had never been his domain, not even in the life he'd planned with Rosa. "She's sick?" he asked. "I don't think so." Maya placed a hand on Lily's forehead. "No fever. I think she's teething." Joseph watched the girl's practiced movements, the way she supported the baby's head, checked her diaper, offered water. These were not skills a 9-year-old should have mastered. "How long you been caring for her alone?" he asked. Maya's eyes remained on the baby. "Since Mom died." 4 months, maybe 5, her voice dropped. "He didn't help much." Said she cried too much. Said it was my fault. The simple statement contained volumes. Joseph felt an unfamiliar anger stir in his chest, not the quick burning rage of youth, but something colder and more dangerous. "Wait here," he said, moving toward the door. Outside, the desert gleamed silver under moonlight. Joseph walked with purpose to a small structure behind his cabin, a storage shed he rarely entered. The padlock was stiff with disuse, but the key still worked after some persuasion. Inside, dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he moved toward a trunk in the corner. He hesitated before opening it, knowing what memories lay within. The trunk's hinges creaked in protest. Inside lay items he hadn't looked at in 40 years. Rosa's shawl, their wedding blanket, the cradle board he'd carved during their first year of marriage. His hands passed over these treasures until his fingers found what he sought. Back in the cabin, Maya looked up with desperate hope as he entered. Joseph held out a small object, a smooth, curved piece of deer antler, polished to a soft gleam. "Teething stick," he explained. "My grandmother made it for when Rosa and I had children." He didn't add that those children never came, that Rosa had died before they could start the family they'd planned. Some pains needed no voice. Maya accepted the antler with reverence, then gently guided it to Lily's mouth. The baby's cries paused as she tested the strange object, then quieted as she began to gnaw on the smooth surface. "It's working," Maya whispered. Her eyes wide with relief, Joseph nodded once, then moved to the wood stove to build up the fire against the night's chill. Neither spoke as the baby's distress faded to occasional whimpers. Then to the heavy breathing of sleep. "You were going to be a father," Maya said finally, the statement hanging in the quiet cabin. Joseph stared into the flames. "Long time ago, what happened to your wife?" The question was direct, unclouded by the social niceties adults used to soften painful topics. Joseph found himself answering with equal directness. "Fever. Doctor was in Phoenix. Too far." The sparse words couldn't convey the 3 days of Rosa's burning skin, her delirious murmurs, his desperate prayers as he tried every remedy he knew. "I couldn't save her." Maya nodded as if she understood completely. "Perhaps she did. My mom had a bad birth." "Too much blood." Her fingers stroked Lily's wispy hair. "The doctor said they did everything they could." They sat in shared silence, two souls who had watched helplessly as women they loved slipped away. "You've been alone since then?" Maya asked. "Yes. Weren't you lonely?" Joseph considered the question. Loneliness implied wanting company. For 40 years, he had wanted nothing but the silence in which he could hear Rosa's voice in his memories. "Got used to it," he said finally. Maya studied him, her eyes older than her years. "I don't think people get used to being alone. They just forget there's another way to be." The simple wisdom struck him silent. Outside, an owl called into the night, its voice echoing across the desert. "He'll be looking for us," Maya said after a while, her voice smaller now. "My stepdad. He gets money from the government for taking care of us. He won't let that go." Joseph watched as she unconsciously clutched the teething stick tighter, as if it might protect them both. "You rest," he said. "I'll watch." Maya's hesitation was brief before exhaustion won. She curled around Lily on the bed, one hand still holding the antler teething stick, the other protectively cradling the baby. Joseph settled into his chair, facing the door. For the first night in 40 years, he stayed inside, keeping vigil not over his own solitude, but over 2 young lives that had somehow breached his carefully constructed isolation. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. Joseph was teaching Maya how to identify edible desert plants when the sound of an approaching vehicle sent them both into tense silence. He gestured for Maya to take Lily inside, while he stood watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. A tribal police cruiser emerged from the haze, moving deliberately down the rutted path toward his cabin. Joseph's hand instinctively reached for the pocket where he kept Rosa's locket, a habit when trouble approached. The cruiser stopped 30 yards from the cabin. A tall man in uniform stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun before approaching. Joseph recognized him immediately. Thomas Redcloud, a boy he'd once taught to track deer, now grown into middle age with the confident bearing of authority. "Joseph Blackfeather," Thomas called, stopping at a respectful distance. "Been a while." Joseph nodded once. "Officer Redcloud, Chief Redcloud now." There was no pride in the statement, merely information. "Congratulations." Thomas glanced at the cabin, then back to Joseph. "Got a call from Nora at the store. Said you came in buying baby supplies." Joseph's expression remained neutral. "That a crime now?" "No crime in shopping." Thomas removed his sunglasses. "But there is a situation with 2 missing children from the San Carlos reservation. Girl and an infant. Heard something about that?" Thomas studied him with practiced patience. "Joseph, if you know anything—" "Been alone 40 years, Joseph interrupted. "Plan to stay that way?" The police chief nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket. "Got something might interest you, though." He held out a folded document. Joseph hesitated before taking it, opening it to reveal a mugshot of a heavy-set man with hard eyes and a sneer that suggested habitual cruelty. "Raymond Diaz," Thomas explained. "Stepfather to the missing children. 3 domestic violence charges. 2 convictions. Recently released from county on a battery charge." Joseph studied the photo, memorizing the face of the man Maya feared. "Man claims his stepdaughter kidnapped his infant." Thomas's tone made his skepticism clear. "Says he just wants his children back." "Not Apache," Joseph observed. "No, married the mother 2 years ago. After she died, state awarded him custody of both children due to lack of relatives. The mother's family, Apache from up north, contested but lost. Grandmother too elderly, they said." Joseph refolded the paper, handing it back. "Why tell me this?" Thomas's gaze was steady. "Because if someone were helping those children stay safe until the system could sort this out properly, I'd want that person to have all the facts." "I keep to myself," Joseph repeated. "Yes, you do." Thomas put his sunglasses back on. "Which is why no one would think to look here." He turned toward his cruiser, then paused. "Got a tribal council meeting in White River tomorrow. Whole department will be there. Won't be patrolling out this way for at least 8 hours. The message was clear. Joseph watched him return to the vehicle, dust swirling as the cruiser turned and headed back toward town. Inside the cabin, he found Maya pressed against the wall beside the window, clearly having heard everything. Her face was pale but determined. "You're sending us away," she stated. "No." The answer surprised even Joseph. Relief flooded her expression, followed quickly by confusion. "But the police, Chief Red Cloud is an old friend." The word felt strange on his tongue after decades of having no friends at all. "He won't be back tomorrow." Maya processed this. "But he knows we're here," he suspects. Joseph moved to a shelf and took down a small wooden box. "There's a difference." He opened the box and removed a piece of folded buckskin. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed a stone pendant, a small piece of black obsidian wrapped in an intricate silver setting, hanging from a leather cord. "This belonged to my mother," he explained, holding it up so the stone caught the light. "Among our people, obsidian offers protection. It guards against those who wish harm." Maya stared at the pendant with wide eyes as Joseph placed it over her head. The black stone rested against her chest, seeming to absorb the light around it. "We need to be ready," he continued. "Your stepfather knows this reservation. If he comes looking, we need a safer place." "Where?" Joseph considered the question. He had avoided his people's sacred places for decades, but perhaps it was time to return. "There's a canyon to the north. Hard to find if you don't know the way." He glanced at Lily, now awake and watching them with solemn eyes. "My grandfather took me there as a boy. No one goes there now except for ceremonies. When do we leave?" "Tomorrow." "While the police are in town." Joseph moved to the door, looking out across the desert that had been both his refuge and his prison. "Pack only what we need." That night, as Maya slept with the obsidian pendant rising and falling with her breath, Joseph sat outside under the stars. For the first time in 40 years, he was planning a future that included someone other than himself. The thought should have terrified him, yet instead he felt an unfamiliar sensation: purpose. Dawn had barely touched the horizon when Joseph loaded his old pickup with essential supplies. Maya stood beside him, Lily secured to her chest with a makeshift carrier fashioned from one of Joseph's old shirts. "Remember what I told you," Joseph said, handing Maya a folded map. "If we get separated, follow this to the canyon." Maya nodded solemnly, tucking the map into her pocket beside the carving knife he'd given her days earlier. The obsidian pendant glinted at her throat, catching the first rays of sunlight. They drove in silence, taking back roads that hadn't seen regular traffic in years. Joseph navigated by memory and landmarks rather than signs. A lightning-struck juniper, a distinctive rock formation, the remains of an old trading post. 2 hours into their journey, as they crossed a dry riverbed, the truck's engine sputtered and died. Joseph tried the ignition repeatedly before accepting the inevitable. "Fuel pump," he muttered, popping the hood. He'd been meaning to replace it. Maya climbed out, Lily still sleeping against her chest. "Can you fix it?" Joseph assessed the aging engine. "Not here. Need parts." His eyes scanned the terrain. They were exposed on the riverbed, visible for miles. Continuing on foot would make them vulnerable, but staying with the truck was equally dangerous. "How far to the canyon?" Maya asked, understanding their predicament. 8 miles? "Rough country," she nodded, adjusting Lily's carrier. "I can walk." Joseph studied the girl, her determined stance at odds with her small frame. He reached into the truck bed and retrieved their packs, handing the lighter one to Maya. "We follow the riverbed 2 miles, then head west into the hills," he explained. "Stay close." The morning heat intensified as they walked, Joseph setting a pace Maya could maintain. He watched her for signs of fatigue, impressed by her endurance. Occasionally, she would murmur to Lily or stop to give the baby water, but she never complained. By midday, they had left the riverbed and begun climbing into rocky terrain. Joseph chose their path carefully, seeking patches of shade where they could rest briefly. During one such break, as Maya settled against a boulder with Lily, Joseph noticed a plume of dust on the distant road, a vehicle moving too fast for these back trails. "We need to move," he said, gathering their things. "Someone's coming!" Maya's eyes widened. "Is it him?" "Can't tell." "Don't want to find out." They quickened their pace, Joseph now carrying both packs. The path grew steeper, forcing them to use hands and feet to climb in some sections. Joseph would go first, then reach back to help Maya up. As the sun began its western descent, they reached a narrow passage between two cliff faces. Joseph stopped abruptly, raising his hand for silence. Ahead of them, freshly disturbed soil and scattered pebbles indicated recent passage. Someone had come this way not long before them. Joseph crouched, examining the ground. The footprints were clearly visible, a man's boots. Heading in the same direction they were traveling. "Someone knows about the canyon," he whispered. Fear flashed across Maya's face as she instinctively tightened her hold on Lily. Joseph considered their options. Going back meant certain exposure. Continuing forward could lead them into an ambush. The sun would set in less than 2 hours, and traveling these paths in darkness would be treacherous. He made his decision, gesturing for Maya to follow him off the main path. They climbed a steep incline until they reached a small rock shelf, hidden from view from both above and below. "We wait here until dark," he explained in a low voice. "Then continue." They settled into the cramped space, Joseph positioning himself so Maya and Lily were protected against the rock wall. As they waited, the baby began to fuss, hungry and uncomfortable. "She'll cry," Maya whispered worriedly. "He'll hear us." Joseph reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a smooth river stone, oval-shaped and mottled with green and brown. In the center was a natural depression, perfectly thumb-sized. "Worry stone," he explained, placing it in Maya's hand. "My father gave it to me when I was a boy. Said his father gave it to him. When you're scared or troubled, rub your thumb here. Helps quiet the mind." Maya turned the stone over, feeling its cool, polished surface. "How does it work?" she asked skeptically. "Gives your fear somewhere to go," Joseph said simply. "Try it." Maya positioned her thumb in the depression and began rubbing in small circles. Her breathing gradually slowed, becoming more measured. After a few minutes, she placed the stone gently against Lily's cheek. The baby's fussing subsided as she became fascinated by the smooth object. As darkness fell, they remained hidden on their rocky perch. Joseph kept watch, his senses alert to any movement below. Once he thought he heard the faint sound of boots on stone, but it faded without drawing closer. "Did your father use this when he was afraid?" Maya whispered, still holding the worry stone. Joseph considered the question. "My father was a medicine man. He faced many things that would frighten others. But yes, he kept this stone until the day he gave it to me." "Were you afraid when your wife died?" The question came softly in the darkness. Joseph felt the familiar ache in his chest. "Not afraid, angry at the sickness, at the doctors who couldn't come, at myself for not saving her. And now?" "Now." Joseph gazed out at the stars emerging above the canyon. "Now I'm afraid of failing again." The simple admission hung between them in the darkness. Maya reached out, her small hand finding his weathered one. The worry stone pressed between their palms, warm now from their shared touch. They moved under cover of darkness, Joseph leading with the sure-footedness of someone who had once known these paths by heart. Maya followed close behind, Lily mercifully sleeping against her chest. The moon provided just enough light to navigate without Joseph's flashlight, which he kept off to avoid detection. Twice they stopped when Joseph sensed movement, melting into shadows until the way seemed clear again. Near midnight, they reached the canyon entrance, a narrow passage between towering rock walls that would be easily missed in daylight and was nearly invisible in darkness. "Through here," Joseph whispered, taking Maya's hand to guide her. The passage opened into a sheltered valley, invisible from the surrounding terrain. Ancient petroglyphs marked the rock walls, barely discernible in the moonlight. A small spring fed a pool of water that reflected the stars above. "This is a sacred place," Joseph explained quietly as they moved deeper into the canyon. "My people have come here for ceremonies, for hundreds of years." "It's beautiful," Maya whispered. her eyes wide as she took in their surroundings. They followed the spring to a rock overhang that formed a natural shelter. Joseph had visited once as a young man, accompanying his father for a healing ceremony. He remembered there had been... "There," he said, pointing to a stone structure built against the canyon wall. "Old ceremonial hut. We'll be safe there." The structure was simple, a low stone wall forming three sides, with juniper posts supporting a roof of branches. Time had weathered it, but the basic shelter remained intact. Joseph cleared the space while Maya tended to Lily, who had awakened hungry and demanding. By the time Joseph had arranged their sleeping area, Maya had fed the baby with the formula they'd carried from the cabin. "Will anyone find us here?" Maya asked as they settled in for what remained of the night. "Few remember this place now," Joseph replied. "Younger generation doesn't come for the old ceremonies anymore." Maya nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She was asleep within minutes, Lily curled against her. Joseph sat at the entrance, keeping watch as he had promised. Dawn revealed the canyon's true beauty. Rust-colored walls rising hundreds of feet, dotted with desert plants clinging to seemingly impossible perches. The spring created a ribbon of green life in the otherwise arid landscape. Joseph left Maya sleeping while he explored their surroundings, checking for any signs of intrusion. Finding none, he returned to their shelter and began unpacking their meager supplies. At the bottom of his pack, wrapped in a bandana, was a small clay pot with intricate designs painted around its circumference. He placed it carefully on a flat stone near the fire pit. When Maya finally woke, rubbing sleep from her eyes, she immediately noticed the pot. "What's that?" she asked, voice still thick with sleep. "Medicine pot," Joseph answered, adding kindling to the fire pit. "For gathering plants." As the morning progressed, Joseph showed Maya which plants growing in the canyon could be used for food or medicine. He demonstrated how to harvest them properly, offering prayers of thanks as his father had taught him. "Always take only what you need," he instructed, as Maya helped collect leaves from a small shrub near the spring. "And always give thanks." They filled the clay pot with their gathered plants, some for tea, others for poultices. A few edible varieties to supplement their dwindling supplies. "My mother made this pot," Joseph explained as they worked. "She taught my father about plant medicine." "He taught me. Is that why they called you a medicine man at the store?" Maya asked, carefully placing a sprig of sage in the pot. Joseph shook his head. "My father was a medicine man. I was just his son." "But you know all this stuff," Maya persisted, gesturing to the plants they'd gathered. "You could be a medicine man too." "Knowing isn't enough," Joseph replied. "A true medicine man serves the people. I turned away from everyone after Rosa died." Maya considered this as she arranged the plants in the pot. "But you didn't turn away from us." The simple observation hung in the air between them. Joseph had no response. By midday, they had established a temporary home in the ceremonial hut. Joseph created a small blind at the canyon entrance where he could watch for intruders without being seen. Maya arranged their sleeping area and set up a place for Lily to lie safely. As the sun reached its zenith, Joseph checked their water supply, enough for 2 days if they were careful. The spring provided fresh water, but boiling it took fuel, which was limited. "I need to go back for the truck," he said finally. "We can't stay here indefinitely." Alarm flashed across Maya's face. "You're leaving us?" "Just for a day. To get the truck or find another way out." He held her gaze steadily. "You'll be safer here than traveling with me." "But what if you don't come back?" The fear in her voice was palpable. Joseph knelt before her, placing the clay medicine pot in her hands. "This pot has been in my family for 4 generations. I'll come back for it." He met her eyes. "And for you." Maya clutched the pot to her chest, her knuckles white. "Promise?" "I promise." Joseph stood, gathering only what he needed for the journey. "Remember what I showed you. Stay hidden. I'll return before the second sunset." As he prepared to leave, Maya suddenly thrust something toward him, the worry stone he had given her the night before. "Take it," she insisted. "So your fear has somewhere to go." Joseph accepted the stone, its familiar weight somehow different now that it had been in her keeping. He slipped it into his pocket alongside Rosa's locket and headed toward the canyon entrance without looking back. Joseph retraced their path with swift determination, the worry stone a constant presence in his pocket. He moved with the stealth his father had taught him, alert to any signs of others in the terrain. By late afternoon, he reached the abandoned truck. A quick inspection confirmed his suspicion. The fuel pump had failed completely. Attempting repairs here would be futile. Joseph gathered additional supplies from the truck, including the spare gas can and his old toolbox. As he worked, the unmistakable sound of an approaching vehicle made him freeze. He slid beneath the truck just as a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Through a narrow gap, he watched a white SUV with government plates slow as it approached his vehicle. Two men emerged, one in a tribal police uniform he didn't recognize. The other, in civilian clothes, looks abandoned, the officer said. Circling the truck, the civilian man, stocky with a face that matched the mugshot Thomas had shown Joseph, knocked on the hood. Could have broken down, he suggested, his voice carrying a hard edge. Question is, where'd they go? Trail leads north, the officer replied, pointing to the faint tracks Joseph and Maya had left the previous day. But it splits a few miles up. They could have gone anywhere. Raymond Diaz, for Joseph was certain this was Maya's stepfather, spat on the ground. Those are my kids. That crazy girl kidnapped my baby. We're doing everything we can, Mr. Diaz, the officer assured him. Chief Red Cloud has officers checking all the local communities. Not good enough, Diaz growled. I want my government check, and I want it now. No kids, no check. It's that simple. The officer's posture stiffened slightly. Sir, our primary concern is the children's welfare. Yeah, Diaz dismissed. Let's follow these tracks while we still have daylight. Joseph remained motionless as they returned to their vehicle and continued north. Only when the dust had settled did he emerge from his hiding place, a cold anger settling in his chest. The man's words confirmed everything Maya had implied. The children were merely a source of income to him. With new urgency, Joseph gathered what he could carry and set off toward the nearest road. He needed to find help, and quickly. 2 miles later, he reached the paved reservation road. The sun was beginning to set, painting the desert in fiery hues. Joseph calculated his options. The main reservation town was 15 miles east, too far to walk before full dark. His cabin lay 10 miles south, also too distant. Then he remembered. Old man Tallis had a place just 3 miles west. The elderly rancher kept to himself much as Joseph did. But they had maintained a cautious respect over the decades, occasionally trading goods without unnecessary conversation. Joseph headed west, maintaining a steady pace as twilight deepened. Stars began to appear overhead, guiding his way along with the thin sliver of a waning moon. Tallis's ranch appeared as a cluster of dark shapes against the horizon. As Joseph approached, a dog began barking, announcing his presence before he reached the gate. A porch light flicked on, and the silhouette of a man with a shotgun appeared in the doorway. "Who's there?" A gruff voice called out. "Joseph Blackfeather," he replied, stopping at a respectful distance. A long pause followed. "Blackfeather? Thought you might be dead by now." "Not yet." The shotgun lowered slightly. "What brings you here after all these years?" "Need help." A ride. Skepticism radiated from the old rancher's stance. "Since when do you ask for help?" "Since now." Another long pause. Then Tallis stepped fully onto the porch, lowering the shotgun. "Must be important." "It is." Tallis assessed him silently before nodding toward the house. "Come in then." "Must be a hell of a story." Inside the sparse ranch house, Tallis poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Joseph accepted one, but didn't drink. Instead, he briefly explained the situation, omitting the exact location of the canyon. "So these kids," Tallis said when Joseph finished, "you planning to keep them?" "They need protection." "That's not what I asked." Joseph stared into the untouched whiskey. "They have a grandmother in Flagstaff. Legal system failed them." Tallis nodded slowly. "And you're what? Making it right?" "Trying to." The old rancher reached into a cabinet and withdrew a leather case, worn with age and handling. He placed it carefully on the table between them. My father's service revolver, he explained, opening the case to reveal an old .38 Special. Military issued 1943, still works. Joseph stared at the weapon. He hadn't held a gun since his youth. Take it, Tallis said. Man looking for those kids doesn't sound like he'll be reasoned with. Joseph hesitated. I don't want to kill anyone. Then don't, but having it might keep you from needing to. Tallis closed the case and pushed it across the table. I owe your father. He healed my wife when the doctors gave up. Said I'd repay someday. Joseph accepted the case, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. I'll take you back to your truck at first light, Tallis continued. Got a fuel pump might work in that old Chevy of yours. Till then, get some rest. That night, Joseph slept fitfully on Tallis's couch, the revolver case and the worry stone both within reach. His thoughts remained with Maya and Lily in the canyon, hoping they were safe, wondering if the stepfather's search would take him there. For the first time in decades, Joseph found himself praying, not just to his ancestors, but to Rosa as well. Watch over them, he thought as he finally drifted to sleep. I'm coming back. Maya woke to Lily's hungry cries as the first light touched the canyon walls. She prepared formula with practiced hands, speaking softly to the infant as she worked. The ceremonial hut felt eerily quiet without Joseph's presence. He'll come back, she assured Lily, and perhaps herself. He promised. After feeding the baby, Maya ventured to the spring for water, keeping within the shelter of the canyon as Joseph had instructed. The medicine pot sat where she had left it, a reminder of his pledge to return. The day stretched endlessly. Maya occupied herself by practicing the plant identification Joseph had taught her, though she didn't stray far from their shelter. By mid-afternoon, Lily had grown fussy with the heat. Maya dampened a cloth in the spring and gently cooled the baby's skin, singing softly, a lullaby her mother had once sung to her. As sunset approached, Maya's anxiety grew. Joseph had said he would return by the second sunset. This was only the first, yet each passing hour heightened her fears. Had he encountered Diaz? Had he been caught by the police? Or had he simply decided they were too much trouble and abandoned them? No, she clutched the medicine pot. He wouldn't leave this behind. Night fell with no sign of Joseph. Maya secured the entrance to the hut with branches, as he had shown her, and kept Lily close, both for the baby's comfort and her own. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by every sound. The wind through the canyon, small animals scurrying outside, the occasional cry of a night bird. Morning arrived with still no Joseph. Maya rationed their remaining food, giving Lily the lion's share of what was left. The formula would last another day at most. By midday, Maya had made a decision. If Joseph didn't return by sunset, she would have to leave the canyon. She couldn't let Lily starve. She packed their few belongings, studied the map Joseph had given her, and waited. The medicine pot clutched tightly in her hands. As the sun began its descent toward the western rim of the canyon, Maya heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the desert. Footsteps. She quickly tucked Lily into a hidden corner of the hut, covering her with the blanket. Then, gripping Joseph's carving knife, she positioned herself beside the entrance. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by the sound of labored breathing. Maya held her breath, knife raised. Joseph appeared at the entrance, carrying a bulging backpack and what looked like an old toolbox. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his eyes lit up when he saw Maya. You came back, she whispered, lowering the knife. I promised. He set down his burden and looked around. Lily! Maya uncovered the baby, who greeted Joseph with a toothless smile that seemed to transform his weathered face. You've been gone so long, Maya said, helping him unpack supplies, fresh food, more formula, a first aid kit, truck-needed parts. Had to go for help. He avoided mentioning his encounter with Diaz. Got it running now. It's hidden 1/2 mile from the canyon entrance. As Joseph organized their new provisions, he withdrew a small object wrapped in a red bandana. He handled it with unusual reverence. What's that? Maya asked. Joseph unwrapped the bandana to reveal a small wooden flute, simply carved, but beautiful in its craftsmanship. Intricate symbols were etched along its length. Eagle bone flute, he explained. Traditional Apache instrument. My grandfather made it. Maya stared at it with fascination. Does it still work? In answer, Joseph raised the flute to his lips and played a brief, haunting melody that seemed to capture the essence of the canyon around them. The wind, the distant cry of an eagle, the whispering of ancient spirits. It's beautiful, Maya breathed when he finished. In the old days, young men would play to court a woman they wished to marry, Joseph explained, his voice soft with memory. I played for Rosa on the night I asked her to be my wife. He handed the flute to Maya. Try. She hesitantly took the instrument, feeling its smooth surface worn by generations of hands. Her first attempt produced only a whisper of sound, but with Joseph's guidance, she managed a single, clear note that resonated through the canyon. Lily giggled in response. A rare sound that made both Maya and Joseph smile. Music heals the spirit, Joseph said, watching the girls delight in the instrument. My grandfather taught me that. As night fell, they shared a meal beside a small, carefully shielded fire. Joseph explained his plan. They would leave before dawn, driving north toward Flagstaff to find Maya's grandmother. What if she's not there anymore? Maya asked, the flute still cradled in her lap. What if she doesn't want us? Joseph considered her question carefully. Then we find another way. But first we try. Later, as Maya and Lily slept, Joseph kept watch at the canyon entrance. The revolver lay wrapped in its case beside him, unused but present, a last resort he prayed he wouldn't need. He thought about the flute, played for the first time in 40 years. The music had awakened something long dormant within him, not just memories of Rosa, but of his heritage, his people, his place in the world beyond the solitary existence he had chosen. In the soft breathing of the sleeping children, Joseph heard the possibility of a future different from the past he had been living in for so long. It frightened him more than any danger they might face on the road ahead. They left the canyon before dawn, Joseph carrying their supplies while Maya held Lily securely against her chest. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten when they reached the truck, hidden beneath a camouflage of desert brush. Stay low until we're well away, Joseph instructed as he helped them into the cab. He placed the medicine pot, flute, and other precious items carefully behind the seat. The truck started with a reluctant growl. Joseph navigated slowly without headlights until they reached the main road, then turned north toward Flagstaff. Maya sat tensely beside him, Lily dozing in her arms. How will we find her? Maya asked, as the reservation boundaries fell behind them. My grandmother. What's her name? Grace Begay. Mom said she lived near the mountain. Joseph nodded. The Navajo woman might be known to some of his contacts in Flagstaff. It had been decades since he'd visited the city, but some connections might remain. They drove in companionable silence, the desert gradually giving way to pine forests as they gained elevation. Joseph kept a careful eye on the rearview mirror, alert for any vehicles that might be following. Near noon, they stopped at a small trading post to refuel. Joseph instructed Maya and Lily to stay out of sight while he went. Inside to pay and ask directions, the elderly Navajo woman behind the counter regarded him with curious eyes as he inquired. But Grace Begay, the basket weaver? She asked. Lives in the old neighborhood east of the tracks. Joseph nodded, hope rising. You know her? My cousin buys her baskets for the shop. The woman studied him. She's not well these days. Arthritis in her hands. Is there an address? The woman seemed to sense the urgency behind his question. I can draw you a map. But why are you looking for Grace? Joseph hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. Taking her granddaughter to see her. Understanding dawned in the woman's eyes. She had clearly heard about the missing children. Without another word, she drew detailed directions on the back of a receipt. Thank you, Joseph said. Folding the paper carefully. Those who help children are blessed, she replied simply. Back in the truck, Joseph shared the news with Maya. We found her. The girl's eyes widened. She's really there. Yes, we'll reach Flagstaff by late afternoon. As they continued north, Maya grew increasingly quiet, tension evident in her rigid posture. Joseph understood her anxiety. What if her grandmother couldn't or wouldn't take them in? She might not remember me, Maya finally voiced her fear. I was little when Mom left. Joseph considered his response carefully. Family bonds run deep, deeper than memory sometimes. The city appeared on the horizon, larger than Joseph remembered, sprawling now where it had once been compact. He navigated cautiously through unfamiliar streets, following the handwritten directions until they reached a neighborhood of small, well-kept homes. The Begay house stood at the end of a quiet street, a modest adobe with turquoise trim and a small garden of native plants. Joseph parked across the street, studying the property for any signs of danger before proceeding. "Ready?" he asked Maya, who clutched Lily with white-knuckled hands. She nodded, though her face suggested otherwise. As they approached the front door, Joseph noticed movement in the window, a curtain falling back into place. Someone had seen them coming. Before they reached the steps, the door opened. An elderly woman with silver hair, pulled into a traditional bun, stood in the doorway. Her eyes, sharp despite her years, moved from Joseph to Maya, then to the baby in Maya's arms. "Grandmother." Maya's voice was barely audible. Grace Begay's hand flew to her mouth. "Melanie's girl," she whispered, using Maya's mother's name. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grace stepped forward, arms outstretched. Maya rushed into her embrace, tears streaming down her face. Joseph stood back, watching the reunion with a mixture of relief and an unexpected hollowness. His task was complete. The children had found their family. Grace looked over Maya's head at Joseph. "You brought them here. Why?" "They needed help," he answered simply. The old woman's gaze was penetrating. "You're Apache." From White Mountain, Joseph nodded. "Come inside," she said. "All of you." The interior of the house was warm and filled with the sense of traditional cooking. Hand-woven baskets in intricate designs lined the walls. Despite the arthritis that had slowed their creation, as Grace fussed over Lily, exclaiming at how much she resembled her mother, she removed a piece of jewelry from her wrist and placed it on the table. "For your protection," she said to Maya, "I've been waiting to give this to you." It was a bracelet of silver and turquoise, the stones forming a continuous pattern around the band. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the silverwork intricate and precise. "It belonged to your mother," Grace explained. "Before that to me, and before that to my mother. 5 generations it has passed from mother to daughter." Maya touched the bracelet reverently. "Mom never mentioned it. She left many things behind when she married that man," Grace said, her voice hardening slightly. "Things she should have kept." The old woman turned to Joseph. "You must be hungry. Both of you sit, eat, then you will tell me everything." As Grace prepared a meal, Joseph watched Maya slip the bracelet onto her wrist. The silver caught the light, gleaming with the history of generations of women who had worn it before her. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the home and the tangible connection to her heritage, Maya seemed to stand taller. The bracelet was more than jewelry. It was belonging, identity, a place in the world after so much uncertainty. Over a simple meal of mutton stew and fry bread, Maya recounted their story, her mother's death, Diaz's neglect and cruelty, her desperate flight with Lily, and finally finding Joseph. Grace listened silently, her wrinkled hands clenched tightly around her teacup. "I tried to get custody," the elderly woman said when Maya finished. "The court said I was too old, my home too small, that the children were better with their stepfather." Bitterness tinged her words. "They wouldn't listen when I told them what kind of man he was." Joseph observed the interaction quietly, noting the resemblance between grandmother and granddaughter, the same determined set of the jaw, the same direct gaze. "He'll come looking," Joseph said finally. "He knows about Flagstaff," Grace nodded grimly. "I know, tribal police called yesterday. Said they were checking all relatives." A heavy silence fell over the table. Their momentary safety was just that, momentary. "I won't go back," Maya stated, her hand protectively covering Lily's head. "I won't let him take us." "No one's taking you anywhere," Grace assured her, though the worry in her eyes belied her confident tone. She turned to Joseph. "You should leave tonight. They'll be looking for your truck." Joseph had been expecting this, the logical conclusion to his involvement. His task was complete. The children were with family. There was no reason for him to stay, yet he found himself reluctant to go. "What's your plan?" Grace considered the question. "My cousin has a place in Tuba City. We could go there until I figure something out. Diaz has the law on his side," Joseph reminded her. "Legal custody." "The law failed these children," Grace replied sharply. "Sometimes you have to make your own justice." Joseph understood her sentiment all too well. Hadn't he made the same choice by hiding the children? As night fell, Grace insisted Joseph stay until morning. "Too dangerous to drive the reservation roads at night," she said, preparing a makeshift bed on the living room couch. After Maya and Lily were settled in the spare bedroom, Grace joined Joseph in the living room. From a cabinet, she removed a manila folder and placed it on the coffee table between them. "Court papers," she explained, opening the folder to reveal legal documents. "From when I tried to get custody," Joseph examined the papers. Petitions, affidavits, court orders, all denying Grace's claims and affirming Diaz's rights as stepfather. "The system's failure was documented in official stamps and signatures. We need to do this properly," Grace said, her voice low to avoid waking the children. "Or they'll always be running." Joseph nodded slowly. "You have someone in mind?" "My nephew's wife works for Indian Child Welfare. She might know options we don't." As they discussed possibilities, Grace suddenly rose and went to a small desk in the corner. From the drawer, she withdrew a yellowed envelope. "There's something you should see," she said, returning to sit beside Joseph. From the envelope, she carefully removed a handwritten letter, the paper thin with age and handling. She passed it to Joseph, from Melanie, Maya's mother. She wrote it just before Lily was born. Joseph hesitated before accepting the letter. "This is private. Family business. Read it," Grace insisted. "It concerns you." Puzzled, Joseph unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky, the words those of a woman who feared she might not survive childbirth. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, my fears came true. Please don't grieve too long. Take the girls and leave Raymond. He's not what he seemed. There's something I never told you. Before everything went wrong, I met someone on the White Mountain Reservation, an Apache man who lived alone. I was researching traditional plant medicine for my degree. He was kind, though so sad. He showed me his wife's garden, taught me about healing plants. I only spent 3 days interviewing him, but I've never forgotten his quiet dignity. If you ever need help, seek out Joseph Blackfeather. He lives in solitude, but I saw goodness in him. Trust him if paths ever cross. All my love, Melanie." Joseph stared at the letter, stunned. "I remember her," he said finally. "A young woman asking about traditional medicines." 3 days in summer. 10 years ago," Grace nodded. "Melanie spoke of you often. Said you reminded her what a good man should be. After her first disappointments with men, I barely spoke to her. Sometimes we speak loudest through our actions." Grace carefully returned the letter to its envelope. She would be grateful her daughter found you. Joseph sat in silence, absorbing the strange connection that had brought Maya to his door. Not random chance, but a thread woven years before. "What will you do now?" Grace asked. It was the question he'd been avoiding since their arrival. Return to his solitude? The thought, once comforting, now felt hollow. "I don't know," he admitted. "The children need protection," Grace said simply. "I'm old. My hands don't work like they used to." She touched the letter. "My daughter trusted you. I trust her judgment." Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the front window. Both Joseph and Grace tensed until it moved on. "We should leave at first light," Joseph decided. "All of us. The truck's not safe anymore, but I know people who can help." Grace studied him, measuring his resolve. Then she nodded once. "I'll be ready." That night, as Joseph lay awake on the couch, his hand rested on Melanie's letter, now tucked safely in his shirt pocket alongside Rosa's locket. 2 women who had seen something in him he had forgotten was there. Dawn had barely broken when a sharp knock at the door jolted everyone awake. Joseph was on his feet instantly, motioning for Grace to take Maya and Lily to the back room. "Police," a voice called. "Miss Begay, we need to speak with you." Joseph grabbed his jacket and slipped out the back door into the garden as Grace cautiously approached the front entrance. From his position behind a tall shrub, he could hear the exchange. "Officers." Grace's voice was calm. "What brings you here so early?" "We're conducting a welfare check, ma'am. We have reason to believe your granddaughter Maya and her infant sister might be here." "I wish they were," Grace replied, her tone convincingly mournful. "I've been praying they'd find their way to me. Mind if we look around? Do you have a warrant, officer?" A pause. "No, ma'am, but their stepfather is very concerned. He's waiting in our vehicle." Joseph's muscles tensed. Diaz was outside. "I'm sorry for his worry," Grace said firmly, "but I'm not comfortable with officers searching my home without proper documentation. If you'd like to return with a warrant, I'll cooperate fully." More words were exchanged, but eventually the officers departed. Joseph waited until he heard the police cruiser pull away before re-entering through the back door. Grace was already packing, her movements swift despite her age. "They'll be back with a warrant," she said grimly. "We have maybe 2 hours," Joseph nodded. "We can't take my truck. They'll be watching for it." "My car's in the garage," Grace said. "Hasn't been driven in months, but it should start." While Grace and Maya gathered essentials, Joseph examined the elderly Buick in the garage. The battery was dead, but he found jumper cables and managed to connect them to his truck, hidden behind the house. After some coaxing, the old car's engine turned over. "Where will we go?" Maya asked as they loaded their meager belongings into the trunk. "I have an idea," Joseph replied, thinking of a contact from his past, someone who might help them navigate the legal system properly. As they prepared to leave, Grace disappeared briefly into her bedroom. She returned carrying a wooden box, intricately carved with traditional Navajo symbols. "Can't leave this behind," she explained, placing it carefully on the back seat beside Maya and Lily. "My father's sand painting kit." Joseph recognized the significance immediately. Sand paintings were sacred in Navajo tradition, temporary works of spiritual art created during healing ceremonies, then destroyed to release their power. Grace caught his glance. "He was a Hatawi, a medicine man like your father." There was respect in her voice. "These tools have helped many find balance." With one final look at the home she might never see again, Grace climbed into the passenger seat. Joseph took the wheel, backing slowly out of the garage. They took back roads out of Flagstaff, avoiding main thoroughfares where police might be watching. Joseph headed west toward Tuba City on the Navajo Nation, where Grace's cousin lived. "We need legal help," Joseph explained as they drove. "Thomas Red Cloud's brother is a tribal attorney in Tuba City. He might know how to challenge Diaz's custody properly." Grace nodded approvingly. "You've been thinking about this?" Since we found Melanie's letter, in the back seat, Maya sat quietly, one hand on Lily's carrier, the other touching her mother's bracelet. The wooden sand painting box rested beside her, a tangible connection to her Navajo heritage. "My grandfather used to make sand paintings to heal people," she said suddenly. "Mom told me stories." Grace turned, surprise evident in her expression. "Melanie shared that with you?" "She seemed to reject so much of our ways after she left." "She told me everything," Maya replied. "About the corn pollen prayers, the cedar smoke for protection, the sand paintings for healing. She said even though we lived in the city, I should never forget where I came from." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought she'd turned away from all of it." "She kept a small jar of corn pollen in our apartment," Maya continued. "She would put a little on her tongue each morning and say a prayer for harmony." The revelation seemed to both comfort and pain Grace. "And after she died, I tried to continue, but Maya's voice hardened. "He threw it away, said it was primitive superstition." Joseph glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting Maya's eyes briefly. In that moment, he understood more fully what had drawn him to help these children. It wasn't just compassion or duty, it was recognition of the sacred bond between heritage and survival. As they crossed onto Navajo Nation land, Grace opened the carved box. Inside lay small cloth bags of colored sands, black, white, yellow, blue, and red, along with feathers, brushes, and other tools of the Hatawi's trade. Perhaps, she said thoughtfully, when we are safe, we should have a healing ceremony. For all of us. The desert landscape stretched before them, vast and timeless. Joseph felt the weight of Rosa's locket against his chest, alongside Melanie's letter. Two cultures, two traditions, coming together through an unlikely connection. I would be honored, he replied. As the miles passed, Joseph found himself contemplating something he hadn't considered in 40 years, a future. Not just survival from day to day, but a path forward with purpose and meaning. Maya's soft humming from the back seat drew his attention. She was singing a lullaby to Lily, the same Apache melody he had taught her days ago at the canyon, tuba. City appeared on the horizon by mid-afternoon, a cluster of buildings amid the vast landscape of the Navajo Nation. Joseph drove cautiously through the outskirts, following Grace's directions to her cousin's home. Elsie Yazzie greeted them with concerned efficiency, ushering the travel-weary group inside without unnecessary questions. Only when they were settled with cups of hot tea did she address the obvious. Police have been here already, she informed them. Asked if I'd seen Maya or her grandmother. Grace's hand tightened around her mug. What did you tell them? That family takes care of family, Elsie replied simply. And that they should look elsewhere. Joseph respected the woman's direct approach. Like Grace, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of an elder who had seen much in her lifetime. We need to speak with Martin Redcloud, he explained. He's a tribal attorney, Elsie nodded. I know Martin, good man. Fights hard for our children. She rose and moved to an old rotary phone on the wall. I'll call him now. While Elsie made the call, Joseph watched Maya gently rock Lily near the window. The girl's vigilance never wavered, her eyes constantly scanning the street outside for potential threats. He'll meet us at the community center in an hour, Elsie announced, hanging up the phone. Said to come through the back entrance. Less visible. Joseph nodded his thanks. We should leave your car here, he told Grace. Walk separately. Less noticeable. They agreed that Joseph would go first with Maya and Lily, followed by Grace and Elsie 15 minutes later. The community center was only a few blocks away, a low, modern building that served as both meeting place and cultural hub for the area. As they prepared to leave, Elsie disappeared into a back room, returning with a weathered leather satchel. Take this, she said, handing it to Joseph. It might help. The satchel was old but well-maintained, its surface decorated with traditional Navajo patterns in faded beadwork. Joseph accepted it with a questioning look. Marriage and birth records, Elsie explained, from the Navajo Nation census and church registries. Going back 4 generations. Joseph unclasped the satchel and glanced inside. Carefully preserved documents filled the interior. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, death records, family trees carefully drawn on yellowing paper. My husband was a tribal historian, Elsie continued. He kept meticulous records of our family lines. Melanie's birth certificate is in there. Maya's too. Their connection to the Begay family is documented all the way back to the Long Walk. Joseph understood immediately the value of what she offered. Legal proof of Maya and Lily's heritage and family connections could be crucial in any custody hearing. This could help establish their right to be with family on the nation, he said. Elsie nodded. Exactly. Indian Child Welfare Act gives preference to tribal families. With proper documentation, a good attorney can make a case. The walk to the community center was tense, Joseph hyper-aware of every passing vehicle, every curious glance. Maya kept Lily close, the baby mercifully quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. Martin Redcloud was waiting at the back entrance as promised. The family resemblance to Thomas was evident, the same watchful eyes, the same measured movements. He led them to a small conference room, locking the door behind them. Thomas called me, he said without preamble. Filled me in on the situation. Joseph was surprised by the chief's intervention, but grateful for the assistance. Diaz has legal custody, Martin continued, but we have grounds to challenge it, especially with evidence of abuse or neglect. He never hurt us physically, Maya said quietly. Just didn't care. Wouldn't feed Lily properly. Left us alone for days sometimes, Martin nodded, making notes. Neglect is abuse, especially for an infant. He turned to Grace. Your previous petition was denied partly because you filed in state court. We need to invoke the Indian Child Welfare Act in tribal court. Will that work? Grace asked. Melanie was enrolled Navajo, but she married outside the tribe. Maya and Lily aren't officially enrolled. That's where these come in, Joseph said, placing Elsie's satchel on the table. Family records proving their lineage. Martin examined the documents with growing interest. This is excellent. With these, we can file for emergency enrollment and temporary custody simultaneously. For the first time since their journey began, Joseph felt a glimmer of genuine hope. There was a path forward, complex and uncertain but legitimate. How long will it take? He asked. Emergency petition can be filed tomorrow. Temporary custody within days if the judge agrees. Martin's expression remained cautious. But Diaz won't give up easily. There will be hearings, possibly in both tribal and state courts. We'll need somewhere safe to stay, meanwhile, Grace said, worry creasing her brow. Martin considered this. There's a family shelter on the western edge of the reservation, run by the nation for women and children in crisis. You'd be protected there. Joseph felt Maya's eyes on him, questioning what this meant for his involvement. Would he leave them now that a legal path was emerging? Before he could address her unspoken concern, Martin added, We'll need character witnesses, people who can testify to the children's well-being in their grandmother's care, and to the risks they faced with Diaz. I'll testify, Joseph said firmly. Martin nodded, a look of understanding passing between the men. That would be helpful. Very helpful indeed. As they finalized their plans, Joseph felt the weight of the leather satchel in his hands, generations of family history preserved through foresight and care. Like the medicine pot, the flute, and the other artifacts that had marked their journey, it represented continuity and belonging, the very things he had denied. Himself for 40 years, the family shelter sat on the outskirts of the reservation, a single-story building surrounded by cottonwood trees and protected by a tall fence. To Joseph, it looked both welcoming and secure. A place designed for healing as much as safety. A Navajo woman in her 40s greeted them at the entrance, her handshake firm as she introduced herself as Director Sarah Begay, a distant cousin of Grace's through marriage. We've prepared a family suite, she explained, leading them through corridors decorated with children's artwork and traditional weaving. 2 bedrooms, shared bathroom, private. The rooms were simple but comfortable, clean beds, sturdy furniture, windows that allowed light but were positioned for privacy. For Maya and Lily, who had spent weeks in flight, it appeared luxurious. No men allowed overnight, Sarah explained apologetically to Joseph. Shelter rules. He nodded in understanding. I'll find accommodations nearby. Martin had arranged a small efficiency apartment for Joseph in town, close enough to reach the shelter quickly if needed. The arrangement seemed logical. The legal process had begun. The children were safe with their grandmother, and his direct involvement could now step back. Yet as he prepared to leave that first evening, Maya followed him to the shelter entrance, Lily balanced on her hip. You're coming back tomorrow? Her question carried the weight of previous abandonments. Yes, Joseph assured her. We have the court hearing in the morning. I'll be here at 8. Still, she watched him with uncertain eyes as he walked to the car. Only when he turned to wave did she offer a small smile in return. The tribal court hearing the next day was brief but productive. Martin presented their petition for emergency enrollment of Maya and Lily in the Navajo Nation, supported by the family records from Elsie's satchel. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, granted temporary enrollment pending full review. This gives us jurisdiction, Martin explained afterward. Now we can file for emergency custody under ICWA. For 2 weeks, their lives fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings often involved legal meetings or court appearances. Afternoons, Joseph would drive Grace, Maya, and Lily to appointments with social workers or counselors who would eventually testify about their observations. During free hours, Joseph found himself increasingly involved in daily activities with the children. He taught Maya more about identifying desert plants on walks around the shelter grounds. He showed her how to carve simple wooden toys for Lily from cottonwood branches. In the evenings, before returning to his apartment, he would tell traditional Apache stories as Lily drifted to sleep. Through it all, Grace watched with knowing eyes, but said nothing about the attachments obviously forming. On the 15th day, as they returned from yet another meeting with Martin, Sarah met them at the shelter entrance with a concerned expression. "There's a package for Maya," she said, handing over a small box wrapped in brown paper. It was left at the front desk. No sender information. Joseph examined the package cautiously before allowing Maya to open it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small handcrafted doll, crudely made from cloth and yarn, with button eyes and a stitched smile. Maya gasped, dropping the doll as if burned. "What is it?" Joseph asked, immediately alert. "It's mine," Maya whispered. "I made it. It was in our apartment in Phoenix." Joseph's instincts flared. "Only someone from Maya's previous life would have this doll. Diaz found us," Grace said, voicing what they all feared. Sarah immediately implemented security protocols, restricting outdoor activities, posting additional staff at entrances, notifying tribal police. Joseph contacted Martin, who promised to expedite their case before the state court could intervene. That night, Joseph refused to leave the shelter despite the rules. He slept in a chair outside the family's suite, Talas's revolver within reach beneath his jacket. Near midnight, Maya emerged in her pajamas, unable to sleep. She sat silently beside Joseph in the dimly lit hallway. "He won't stop looking for us, will he?" she finally asked. Joseph considered softening the truth, but decided against it. "No, the government money is too important to him." Maya nodded, having already understood this reality. From her pocket, she withdrew something small and placed it in Joseph's hand. It was a corn husk doll, recently made, the dried corn husk still supple and fragrant. Its simple form was adorned with tiny pieces of colored cloth and hair made from unraveled black yarn. "I made it today," Maya explained. "Sarah showed me how." "It's a protection doll." Joseph examined the small figure. Despite its simplicity, it carried a dignity in its craftsmanship. In the old days, Navajo children would make these as companions, Maya continued, repeating what she'd learned. "But they can also be made for protection, if you tie in something from the person you want to protect." Joseph noticed a tiny thread of blue woven into the doll's chest, the same color as Lily's blanket. "I put something from each of us," Maya said quietly. "A thread from Lily's blanket. A strand of grandmother's silver hair." She pointed to the doll's black yarn hair. "And this is from your jacket. I found it caught on the truck door." The simple gesture, incorporating each of them into this protective talisman, moved Joseph deeply. In Maya's mind, they were already a unit, a family worthy of protection as a whole. "It's very good work," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Will it help?" Maya asked, the child in her momentarily overcoming the forced maturity of recent months. Joseph closed his hand gently around the corn husk doll. "Yes," he said with conviction. "It will help." After Maya returned to bed, Joseph sat holding the small figure, turning it over in his weathered hands. In all his years of solitude, he had forgotten the power of such simple objects, not in their material form, but in the intention and care with which they were created. The tribal court hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Joseph arrived at the shelter an hour early, having barely slept in his chair the previous night. He found Grace already awake, braiding Maya's hair in the traditional Navajo style, while Lily played on a blanket nearby. "We need to look our best," Grace explained, her fingers working with practiced precision despite her arthritis. "Show respect for the court." Joseph nodded, understanding the importance of presentation. He himself had shaved carefully and worn the only button-down shirt he owned, a faded blue chambray purchased years ago for some forgotten occasion. Martin arrived as they were preparing to leave, his expression grave but determined. "Diaz filed a counter-petition in state court," he informed them. claims the tribal court has no jurisdiction since the children weren't enrolled members when he received custody. But the emergency enrollment, Grace began, creates a strong position. But not ironclad, Martin admitted. Judge Tsosi understands what's at stake. She'll hear our case first, before the state court can intervene. They traveled to the tribal courthouse in Martin's car, the mood tense but resolute. Joseph carried the corn-husk doll in his pocket, a small talisman against the uncertainty ahead. The courtroom was smaller than Joseph had imagined, with wooden benches and walls adorned with both the American flag and the Navajo Nation flag. Judge Tsosi entered promptly at 9, her black robes contrasting with the turquoise and silver jewelry at her neck and wrists. Martin presented their case methodically. The documentation of Maya and Lily's Navajo heritage, testimony from social workers about their positive adjustment at the shelter, Grace's capability as a guardian despite her age. Joseph testified about finding the children, their journey, and the evidence of neglect he had observed. When the court took a brief recess, Martin approached their bench with news. "Diaz is here," he said quietly. With his attorney and a state social worker, Joseph instinctively moved closer to Maya, who had paled at the mention of her stepfather. "Can they intervene?" Grace asked. "Not directly in this proceeding," Martin assured them. "But they're waiting to serve papers if the ruling doesn't go our way." When court resumed, Judge Tsosi announced she would hear from Maya privately in her chambers. The girl followed the judge with remarkable composure, her back straight, the silver and turquoise bracelet gleaming at her wrist. 20 minutes later they returned. Maya's eyes were red-rimmed but dry as she rejoined her grandmother. Judge Tsosi resumed her seat, her expression unreadable as she shuffled through her notes. Having reviewed the evidence and spoken with the child, she began, "This court finds that Maya and Lily Begay Diaz are eligible for enrollment in the Navajo Nation through their maternal lineage, which has been established by substantial documentation." Joseph felt a current of hope run through him. Furthermore, the judge continued, "Under the Indian Child Welfare Act, placement preference is given to extended family members and tribal homes. The court grants temporary guardianship to Grace Begay, with permanent guardianship to be determined at a hearing 6 months hence, pending home studies and continued positive reports." Grace clasped her hands tightly, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. Maya leaned against her grandmother, relief evident in every line of her body. "Finally," Judge Tsosi concluded, "this court issues a temporary protection order against Raymond Diaz, prohibiting contact with the minor children until the final guardianship hearing, as they prepared to leave the courtroom." Joseph noticed Maya hanging back, her attention caught by something in the courtroom. Following her gaze, he saw Raymond Diaz for the first time in person, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, staring at Maya with naked hostility. Joseph stepped between them, blocking Diaz's view of the girl. The man's eyes shifted to Joseph, narrowing in assessment and dislike before he turned away. Muttering to his attorney outside the courthouse, Martin cautioned them that while this was a significant victory, challenges remained. The state court may still attempt to assert jurisdiction. Diaz won't give up easily, not with the monthly benefits at stake. "What do we do now?" Grace asked. "Return to the shelter. Continue the home study process. Build the strongest possible case for permanent guardianship." Martin's voice softened. "And try to give these children some stability in the meantime." As they walked toward the car, Joseph felt a tug at his sleeve. Maya pressed something into his hand, a small object wrapped in a scrap of red cloth. "Open it later," she whispered. That evening, after ensuring the family was safely settled at the shelter, Joseph returned to his apartment. Only then did he unwrap Maya's gift. It was a carved stone fetish, a small bear figure polished and worn with age. A tiny bundle of herbs and beads was tied to its back with sinew, and a thin streak of turquoise ran through the stone like a vein of life. Joseph recognized it immediately as a traditional Zuni carving, likely passed down through generations. Such fetishes were believed to carry the power and medicine of the animal they represented, the bear symbolizing strength, healing, and protection. A small folded note accompanied the fetish. "This was my mother's. Grandmother says it protected our family for generations. Now it should protect you too." Maya Joseph sat holding the small stone bear, deeply moved by the gift. That Maya would entrust him with something so precious, so connected to her heritage and family protection, spoke volumes about her trust in him. He placed the fetish carefully on the small table beside his bed, alongside Rose's locket, the worry stone, and the corn husk doll, a growing collection of talismans marking his unexpected journey from solitude to connection. 3 months passed with surprising swiftness. The temporary guardianship order provided a foundation of stability that allowed them all to begin healing and building a future. Grace, with help from the Tribal Housing Authority, secured a small 2-bedroom home on the reservation, modest but comfortable, with a garden plot where she began teaching Maya about traditional plants. The social worker's reports consistently praised the loving environment and Maya's improved emotional state. Joseph remained nearby, renting a small cabin just a mile from Grace's new home. He visited daily, helping with household repairs, teaching Maya Apache crafts, or simply providing quiet companionship as they adjusted to their new life. Lily thrived under the consistent care and attention, crawling energetically and attempting her first wobbly stands. Her babbling now included recognizable sounds: Ma for Maya, Ga for Grace, and to Joseph's private amazement, Joe when he entered the room. The threat of Diaz hadn't disappeared entirely. His attorney continued filing motions in state court, though Martin successfully countered each one. Occasionally, tribal police reported an unfamiliar vehicle driving slowly past Grace's home, but increased patrols had kept direct confrontations at bay. On a warm Saturday in late summer, Joseph arrived to find Grace preparing for a special occasion. "The naming ceremony," she explained, crushing herbs in a stone mortar. "For Lily, it's time she received her Navajo name." Joseph nodded, understanding the significance. Among many tribes, a naming ceremony was an important ritual, acknowledging a child's place within the community and tradition. "I'd like you to attend," Grace continued, her hands working steadily. As family, the simple designation, family, caught Joseph off guard. He had been carefully maintaining a boundary in his own mind, being present without presuming too much about his place in their lives. "I'd be honored," he managed. The ceremony was to be held the following morning at sunrise. That evening, as Grace completed preparations and Maya helped Lily into special clothes adorned with traditional beadwork, Joseph found himself sitting on the porch steps. Contemplating this unexpected turn in his life's journey, Maya joined him, holding something wrapped in a square of white buckskin. "Grandmother says you should have this for tomorrow," she said, handing him the package. Joseph carefully unwrapped the buckskin to reveal a bolo. He tied a simple leather cord with a striking silver and turquoise clasp shaped like a thunderbird. "It belonged to my grandfather," Maya explained. "Grandmother says you should wear it for the ceremony." Joseph ran his thumb over the smooth stone and intricate silver work. "This is too valuable to give away." "It's not a gift," Maya clarified. "It's a loan. For as long as you're with us." Her directness, as always, cut through pretense. "Are you staying, Joseph?" After the final hearing, the question he'd been avoiding for months now hung between them in the evening air. His cabin on the White Mountain Reservation remained empty but intact. His solitary life there was still available to him. Unchanged after 40 years, yet the thought of returning to that existence now felt hollow. "I don't know," he answered honestly. Maya nodded, accepting his uncertainty without judgment. "Grandmother says some people carry their home inside them. They just need to find the right place to set it down." With that observation, wise beyond her years, she returned inside, leaving Joseph with the borrowed bolo tie and much to consider. The naming ceremony began before dawn, with only close family and a few tribal elders present. Joseph wore the Thunderbird bolo tie, feeling both honored by its loan and burdened by its implications. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, the elder conducting the ceremony held Lily toward the four directions, speaking the Navajo prayers that had remained unchanged for generations. When he announced her Navajo name, Ahehi Ateid, meaning grateful girl, Grace wiped tears from her eyes. Following tradition, small gifts were presented to the child. Grace gave a tiny silver bracelet that would grow with her. Maya offered a handmade doll fashioned in the traditional way. Several elders brought tokens of blessing, an eagle feather, a small pouch of sacred corn pollen, a carved wooden animal. When Joseph's turn came, he hesitated. He had brought nothing, unaware that gifts would be expected. Then, almost of its own accord, his hand moved to his shirt pocket where Rosa's locket had rested for 40 years. He carefully removed it, the silver warmed by decades of close contact with his heart. For a moment he held it in his palm, feeling a silent conversation with the woman he had loved and lost. Then, with surprising peace, he placed the locket gently around Lily's neck, where it gleamed against her ceremonial dress. "This belonged to someone who would have loved you very much," he said simply. Grace's eyes widened in recognition of the significance. Maya reached out to touch the locket reverently, understanding without being told that this was no ordinary gift. The elder nodded approvingly. "The child now carries the blessing of your ancestors as well as her own," he said. "Two strong traditions to guide her path." As the ceremony concluded and they shared a traditional meal, Joseph found himself watching the locket catch the morning light as Lily played in Maya's lap. The small silver heart that had contained his grief for so long now adorned a new life, a symbol of continuity rather than loss. For the first time, he could imagine Rosa approving of this transfer of her memory into a future he was somehow, unexpectedly, part of. The final guardianship hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Joseph drove Grace, Maya, and Lily to the tribal courthouse, the atmosphere in the car a mixture of hope and tension. 6 months had passed since the temporary order, 6 months of building a life while waiting for this decisive day. "Whatever happens," Grace said as they parked, "we face it together." Martin met them at the courthouse steps. His normally reserved expression brightened by cautious optimism. "All the reports are favorable," he informed them. "The home study, the counselor's evaluations, Maya's school progress. Everything supports permanent guardianship." Inside, Joseph immediately noticed Raymond Diaz sitting with his attorney. The man's bulk diminished somewhat after months of legal defeats, but his eyes still cold with determination. Beside him sat a woman Joseph didn't recognize, dressed in a severe suit and clutching a leather portfolio. "State Child Welfare Supervisor," Martin murmured. "Final attempt to assert jurisdiction." Judge Sosi entered, and the proceedings began with the formality that had characterized the previous hearings. Reports were submitted, testimony given. Grace spoke eloquently about the children's progress. Maya, now more confident, answered questions clearly about her happiness in her new home and school. When Diaz took the stand, his testimony focused primarily on financial hardship and his rights as the children's legal stepfather. The children themselves were barely mentioned, except as obligations unfairly taken from him. As the hearing progressed, Joseph found himself studying the man who had caused Maya and Lily so much fear. There was nothing outwardly monstrous about him, just a bitter, entitled man who viewed the children as possessions and meal tickets, rather than human beings deserving of love and protection. The state supervisor spoke last, arguing that while the children appeared to be thriving, state authority should supersede tribal jurisdiction in this case. Given the complexity of the situation, as Judge Sosi called a brief recess to consider her ruling, Martin leaned over. "It's going well, but we should be prepared for any outcome." Joseph nodded, watching Maya comfort Lily, who had grown restless during the long proceedings. The baby, now a toddler taking her first steps, reached for him and he lifted her easily, a motion that had become natural over the months. When court resumed, Judge Sosie's expression revealed nothing as she sorted through her notes. "This court has carefully reviewed all evidence and testimony," she began. "The question before us is what serves the best interests of these children, while respecting both tribal sovereignty and family bonds." She addressed each argument methodically before delivering her decision. "This court grants permanent guardianship of Maya and Lily Begay Diaz to their grandmother, Grace Begay, with all legal rights and responsibilities thereof." Grace clasped her hands in prayer, tears streaming freely down her face. Maya buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mr. Diaz's petition for visitation rights is denied at this time, with possibility for review in 1 year if he completes parenting classes and maintains sobriety as documented by the court." Diaz stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger, but his attorney pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. As they left the courthouse, Joseph felt a profound sense of completion. The children were safe. Their future was secure. His task, begun on that fateful night when a girl and baby appeared at his door, was finished. Yet instead of relief, he felt a hollow uncertainty. What came next? Return to his solitary cabin? Resume the isolated existence that now seemed like a half-life? That evening, they gathered at Grace's home for a small celebration. Neighbors brought food, an elder sang blessing songs, and Maya's new school friends played in the yard. Joseph sat on the porch steps, slightly removed from the festivities, watching as the community embraced the family that had become so important to him. Grace joined him, her eyes knowing. "You're thinking of leaving," she said. Not a question. Joseph didn't deny it. "My place is back on White Mountain, is it?" Her gaze was direct. "Seems to me you've been making a different place these past months." Before he could respond, Maya approached, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle. Behind her came several tribal elders Joseph had come to know during their time on the Navajo Nation. "We have something for you," Maya said. Presenting the bundle with ceremonial solemnity, Joseph unwrapped the cloth to reveal a cane of polished mesquite wood. The handle was carved into the form of an eagle's head, its eyes inlaid with tiny pieces of turquoise. Intricate symbols spiraled down its length, some Apache, some Navajo, telling a story in the ancient language of both peoples. "A talking stick," explained one of the elders. "Made by many hands. Maya carved the eagle." Grace added the turquoise. Others contributed the symbols. Joseph ran his fingers along the smooth wood, feeling the hours of craftsmanship in every curve and line. "Among our people," the elder continued, "a talking stick is given to those whose words carry wisdom, those who help guide the community." "I'm not a leader," Joseph said quietly. "You guided these children to safety," Grace replied. "You helped heal a broken family, and you told me stories," Maya added, "about plants and animals and the old ways, stories that should be shared." Joseph looked up to find all eyes on him, not just Grace and Maya, but the gathered community members. He saw in their faces not just acceptance but invitation. "My father was the medicine man," he said. "Not me. I turned away from that path." "Perhaps," said the eldest of the group, a man whose lined face spoke of a century of tribal history, "the path waited for you to return when you were ready." As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Joseph held the talking stick, this unexpected gift representing not just honor but responsibility. After 40 years of silence, he was being asked to speak, to teach, to pass on what he knew. Maya leaned against his shoulder. Lily toddled over to climb into his lap, and Grace watched with quiet satisfaction as Joseph finally understood what they had known for months. He was home.